Hey, folks, before we start, this is Michael checking in. Hey, how's it going? How's your week been? Great, I hope. I'm just letting you know that this is part 2 of our sort of Prydain extravaganza here. If you haven't listened to part 1, which should be like the directly prior episode to this, check that one out for a little added context, and then come back here and listen to the final installment of our Chronicles of Prydain reading adventure. But if you already did that, then you're exactly where you should be. Hope you enjoy the episode. Bye!
The Book of 3 was a book of prophecy, but no more. And it's actually become basically a description of Taran's life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when King Pryderi gets his hand on the book, if it wasn't enchanted, he would have opened the book, excited to see his future, and instead have gotten the Chronicles of Prydain. He would have just gotten like Taran chapter 1, flip, 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 flip. Taran chapter 12, flip. And he's like, what is this? And Dalbin's like, that's my Taran fan fiction. Book 5, we pick up right after Rode Off into the Sunset, which surprised me.
We haven't dealt with Death Lord Aran basically at all for most of these books.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, Book 5.
Somehow, Death Lord Aran returns.
He just suddenly basically makes himself known, but it turns out that he can't just appear as himself. So he actually disguises himself. He appears as Taran to Fluter and Gwydion.
It is explained to us later by Mag, who's like, when I left the side of Akron, I went to Aran, and I told him how to get the better of Gwydion, because we learned that Aran is after Gwydion's sword,
Mm-hmm.
Dyrnwyn,
yes.
which we get in Book 1. And so Aran does his magical disguise thing and goes like, help, I'm in trouble. And Gwydion's like, be right there. Oh, no! And the huntsmen ambush him.
Yeah.
And nearly kill him.
And then they get the sword.
And Fluter brings Gwydion back to Caer Dallben just as Taran arrives. And Akron is like, Aran? He's back at it? Time to go fuck him up.
we had a really funny conversation, and I'm going to retell it as best I can yesterday. Akron's whole plot in this last book, her whole plan is to theoretically just march straight at the Death Lord's castle and hope it works out. Because
and she goes by herself.
She steals a horse from Dallben and just leaves. And we don't hear about her for a huge chunk of the book. And then we find her just face down in the mud. I guess a couple hundred yards from the castle. I didn't make it. And they're like, Akron, how did you get here? And she's like, I just kind of walked at the castle, and I had some followers who, I stayed the night with, but I guess they weren't followers enough to follow me. And they're like, she sounds kind of delirious. Maybe she didn't even have followers. Maybe she just walked straight at the castle from Caer Dallben, and this is how far she made it.
She hasn't eaten or drank anything in a long time.
I imagine
she's probably
She has no magic, she has no weapons, and clearly no plan, because when she gets in the castle, she doesn't do anything. She's just like, revenge, I'll kill everyone, but she doesn't enact anything.
Yeah.
And then when she finally gets her hands on the Death Lord, her lack of plan means she dies.
Yeah.
Because she just grabs him, and then she's like, and then she dies.
She does kind of save Taran.
Yes, but it's wonderful.
It's great. My headcanon is that she had magic for so long, over 1,000 years or something, that the idea of exhaustion or hunger was foreign to her. So she was like, oh, time to go get her on. Easy peasy. I'll do what I've always done, which is whatever I want with no consequences. And just went out into the world and was just my mouth feels weird. My abdomen, my stomach feels kind of rumbly. What is that? I'm sure it's nothing. I'll just keep walking up this mountain. And then just eventually, like you said,
just pelted by Gwithanes and whatnot until she collapses.
Oh, Akron.
Anyway, we just skipped a huge portion of the book. But basically, everyone's back. Eilonwy's back. She's like, did you find your parentage? And Taran's like, nah, don't worry about it.
And they do have a nice interaction at the beginning. Jino, you were talking about...
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little more about this.
In book 1, Taran keeps antagonizing Eilonwy unintentionally, and then Eilonwy like bites back, and it's a very like they don't communicate very well. But by the time we've gotten to book 5, Taran knows Eilonwy well enough to that he's able to poke her buttons, and Eilonwy knows Taran well enough to know that he's just messing around with her, and so she's able to mess around with him, and they both walk away from the interaction having enjoyed time as friends. And so the same dialogue is presented in different context, which I think is really wonderful. It shows just a lot of growth in the relationship, and then we don't get any of it for the rest of the book because they have to split up again, and we're like, no!
Yeah.
Would have been nice.
And also Glue's there.
Yeah, Glue.
Why?
Oh, Glue. Oh, Glue.
He doesn't do anything.
He's only there to cause problems.
Yeah, literally.
Glue's small now. They shrunk him. He was big, and he's
now
small
all he
now.
talks about is like, back when I was a giant, I could have done this. Like anytime they encounter a problem during their quest, he's like, well, if I was a giant, I could have climbed this wall or whatever.
His mantra is, this global war is an inconvenience to me specifically, and all of you need to apologize.
Yeah, but basically,
I think it starts out, Gwydion gets better and he's like, we got to go to Smoit and form a battle plan.
oh yes, but then
to get the
Smoit's
sword back.
castle has been taken over by Mag.
Yeah. And that's
And
when
so-
Mag's like, this is why what happened to Gwydion happened, because I told Aran that Gwydion has a soft spot for Taran.
Yeah.
And he's going to make me Aran's going to make me super powerful.
So it's like Gwydion, Taran, Gurgi, and Rune get captured by
Smoit.
And Smoit.
Rune's on the outside.
Rune's on the outside.
And Rune is King Rune
yeah,
now.
he's king now.
He's like, I'm King Rune now. My father died last summer.
I listened to
you're
the
like,
audiobook,
whoa.
and King Rune's performance of that line is so jovial, and I was like, huh? You okay, buddy? And King Rune's like, and now I do buildings.
I'm building a seawall for my people. It's not working, but we're going to keep going.
Yeah.
The way he describes the seawall is, I start at both ends at the same time and just hope we meet in the middle. And we didn't. Gotta start again.
And then Taran gives him some feedback on how he could make the seawall better. And, it's very nice.
But he's like a welcome presence.
Yes. He's a great guy.
Doesn't
anyway,
stick around.
I was so sad.
Fluter and Eilonwy and Prince Rune mount like a breakout.
With Gwistel.
With Gwistel.
Gwistel shows up and
Gwistel
Eilonwy...
shows up with like smoke bombs and
Gwistel
like
shows up with
fire
the Breath
mushrooms.
of the Wild inventory. He shows up like Link, like, yeah, here's some mushrooms, yeah.
Okay, so he has like blinding powder, and then he has
Smoke eggs
that like are basically smoke bombs.
I love when they're like, what's in the bag, Gwistel? Eilonwy's like, tell me what's in the bag. And he's like, eggs.
Well, no, they're sorting through his stuff because they're like, fine, if Gwistel won't help us, at least give us some stuff that we can use. And they're like, oh, you got some rope.
Freaking Gwistel,
I guess we can use some rope. And then they're like, okay, well, at least he has some food. And they like grab the eggs. He's like, no. You can't eat those. They're like, what are they then? He's like, when you smash them on the ground, there's smoke.
Victoria's doing the 2 index fingers tapping together motion.
Victoria's making Gwistel sound so sympathetic here. Gwistel shows up, and they're like, Gwistel, oh my God, thank God. Like, some very important people, some very important humans have been captured by the enemy, and we're the only people who are in the vicinity to help. And Gwistel's like, sounds like a you problem. I'm out of here. And they're like, Gwistel, please, if you have any assistance. And Gwistel's like, I'm just carrying a bag full of grenades. But that probably won't do anything. See, and they're like, Gwistel, can we have the grenades? And he's like,
And then they quote unquote squeeze him.
And then Gwistel's
That's
like,
the only way to get
They're basically
Fine.
like, what will the king of the fair folk think if he hears that you left us with no aid and just abandoned us to
Aran's machinations.
Yeah. And he's like, okay.
To be fair, Gwistel is on his way to tell
Yes,
his
he
king
is on a journey.
bad things are happening. But, I mean, you got a bag of grenades.
Yeah.
Give them to the people. What are you going to do with them?
Maybe he was expecting a lot of grenade usage on his way back.
Guess.
But he does give him the stuff. And they do break out the people, and that's when Smoit does his whole, I imagine him walking with like big arm thrusts down the hall, like, I am just going to use my hands to wring that traitor's neck.
Yes. And then there's this really, really great payoff moment where King Rune rides in and he basically pretends like, okay, King Rune's greatest strength is just like the power of manifestation and BS. Like, he's just like, I have a plan. It's a great plan. They're like, I don't think this is a good plan. He's like, but I believe in the plan, so it's going to work. So he rides in and he's basically like talking to a non-existent army, but he's saying it with such confidence that everyone is like, oh God, we're under attack. And they're like turning around being like, where's the army? And he's like, charge! And they're like, oh my God, they're charging.
And then seconds before they realize the army's not there, a giant cat leaps over the wall and starts eating them.
They're like, oh, that's almost worse.
So Rune has his big moment, which is like so true to his character.
He saves everyone.
Yeah, sadly,
ultimate competence.
He passes away in the battle.
It's so... I forget.
How did you describe it? He's like leaning against the wall in like the dying soldier pose.
Yeah, it just, at least that's the image to my mind. He's like leaning against a cart with his like legs splayed out and his head kind of drooped. And you're like, I feel like I've seen that in like paintings or photos.
That's how Tom Hanks was stanced up at the end of Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, okay, so I have that.
Yeah.
He's in the Tom Hanks pose before Tom Hanks was in the Tom Hanks pose. Yeah. And Taran goes over to him because Eilonwy finds him first and he's just like, hello. And you're like, oh my gosh, my heart is breaking.
Not Rune!
There's
Take
some
glue! We don't need glue.
And this is like the first death of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are other deaths where you're like, this person's a part of the old guard. You expect in a certain way, like, oh, the mentors sort of like end up going away in one form or another. But Rune is like a part of the new guard and he's a great guy and he's gone like at the very beginning of the book. And you're just like, oh.
It really raises the stakes.
Yeah, you're like, oh,
because now you're like, oh, any of them could go.
Yeah.
And so their game plan changes. Gwydion's like, that was awful.
Yeah.
Apparently, as we've learned from Meg, Aran is going to attack Caer Dathel, or Dinas Rhydnant.
He's going to attack the High King's castle.
We're going to do a Pelennor Fields battle. We're going to do a Lord of the Rings Pelennor Fields.
Yeah.
We got to get back there, like stat.
And we need armies.
So Smoit gathers his people. Meg gives a bunch of interesting details where he's like, Aran has been fostering relationships with a bunch of different Cantrev lords secretly. And now that he's got the sword back and now that he's on the move, he's raising all of these like bannermen that had just been sort of like hanging out. Like it all makes sense when you put the pieces together. Book 1, the Cauldronborn are all out and about. Book 2, we get the Black Cauldron, destroy it, and we see no more Cauldronborn until the middle of book 5. And we're led to believe, okay, Aran's just hoarding them in a Nuven as like a garrison, and he knows he can't make any more because the Black Cauldron's gone. The moment he gets Dernwyn, the sword, back is when he sends the Cauldronborn, his Deathless Warriors, back out.
And so the implication is...
one has to do with the other.
The Cauldronborn are now truly invincible.
Yeah. We never like quite put that together until the end of the book. Basically, they go to Dinas Rhydnant and we meet the High King Math, who's like a nice old king. We'd talk to Taliesin, the chief bard in the Hall of Lore, who offers Fluter any harp. And Fluter's like,
This was really sweet. Where he's like, I'm going to keep my harp. The one that breaks all the time whenever I lie. You know, we're buddies now. We've been through a lot.
The old pot.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, the most tragic death in the book.
That
Jino's opinion too
made me so sad.
I was so sad too.
We'll get to it.
We'll get to it. Gwydion's like, I have a really good friend from college coming from like Western Prydain, vaguely Western Prydain. I'm going to bring out the map again.
Is this King?
This is King Pryderi.
Which his name's almost Prydain, which made me very confused.
Yeah, at this point, all the names of the various lords and kings kind of blurred together.
I like that his name is close to like being Prydain because it makes, for me anyway, it makes me feel like, oh, this guy's like got a history here. This guy's like old blood.
And we meet King Math, and his whole deal is, God, this sucks. Being king's hard.
King Math is like, I'm real tired, guys. And Math is like, I'd rather die in very peaceful times rather than hear the horn of Gwyn, which is like the mythological hunter who sounds the deaths of like, I think warriors or people in the field. But he's like, I want to die peacefully. Call Taran's like partial mentor figure, is the same way. He's like, I just want to get back to my vegetable garden.
Does Taran gather the free comments before or after the Pelennor battle?
He gathers them before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like that's also important because Taran becomes a war leader.
Yeah.
Because he's the only person who has connection to the free comments in their little like war council. And so Eilonwy hangs up her little embroidery of Henwen as his war banner.
It's so cute.
It's all these
the
little
white
things.
pig banner.
Yeah.
Like, that's another thing. Even though Eilonwy is like, I didn't like being taught things at the castle. When they ride up to Smoit's castle, Eilonwy gets separated from Taran and Gwydion and all that, and they ride up in advance and get captured. When Eilonwy's riding up with Fflewddur, from stuff she's learned about like statecraft and like tradition, she's like, shouldn't they be flying like the flag of the House of Dawn if Gwydion's there?
Yeah.
And Fflewddur's
it's like
Whoa!
traditional to like welcome guests by flying their flag. And then Fflewddur's like, well, maybe they don't want to like broadcast that he's here. And then she's like, okay, then why do they have so many guards protecting the castle? And then Fflewddur's like, well, they're protecting Prince Gwydion. And she's like, we're not supposed to know he's there. So she's like, something's up. And then that's why they decide, okay, we're not going to go up and just go into the castle. We're going to send just Fflewddur in first because he's a bard and he can just kind of like come and go as he pleases. And that's when Fflewddur's like, oh, you're right. Mag is here and he's captured them.
The spider!
Yeah. But Eilonwy has been practicing embroidery and she's not very good at it and she's kind of annoyed by it, but she does embroider like a handkerchief for Taran.
Yeah.
And then she takes it with her because she's like, I'm going to keep working on this during our quest.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually she finishes it and then makes that his war banner.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Also,
really great.
when I got to that part, I was like, because all I think about is Boy with Pig from our episode 29 or whatever. And I'm like, sick.
Now he's man with pig.
Yeah. Jino and Victoria are going to love a war banner that's a pig.
I do.
Guys, I literally wrote down, hang on. Because I take notes when I read, so I like have things to talk about. But I was like, what did I write? Pig banner, pig banner.
That pig banner goes through it. My
Yeah.
God. In short, the war council, the band of companions, split up. They go to their respective kingdoms. They gather troops, and they meet back in King Mat's castle. And they prepare specifically for the coming of King Prydain, which I think you were talking about.
Yeah, Gwydion's like, I got this old friend. We've been through the wars together.
Mm-hmm.
Super great dude. We tore it up when we were young. Awesome guy. You're going to love him. Named King Prydain. He's got like huge armies. It's a sure thing with him here. And then King Prydain rolls up and is like, you all suck. You're all warring against each other and there's constant like bickering and warfare here. Aran promises order and peace. I'm siding with him. And Gwydion's like, Aran promises the peace of death, the silence, the end of all things. You suck, man. What happened to you? You've been on 4chan too long.
So Prydain like basically sieges the castle,
Yeah.
but he doesn't attack. That's weird.
Normally it's like, oh, you want a siege. We read Redwall.
Yeah.
And in Redwall, they're like, we got high walls. Clooney has an army made up of only infantry. We can just wait him out.
His longest range missile is rock.
Yeah. And in Redwall, they create a giant ballista, an anti-personnel ballista.
But in Prydain, they don't have time.
Yeah, Gwydion's like, Prydain is so many people. If he like fully amasses and hits the castle, he'll just bust right through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We have to intercept him like on the way, on the march, and break up his momentum, which is an interesting, normally you don't get that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes like this harassment, mobile war thing as Prydain's people, at least as I imagine it, as Prydain's people roll in, Gwydion and all these various armies that they've gathered are kind of harrying them on the sides and trying to break them apart. And yeah, Prydain's not ultimately going for the castle. It's just like he's spending time out in the field. And then, lo and behold, the Cauldron-born in full force walk over the hill like it's taken us super long to get here.
Just 1,000 Terminators.
Yeah, basically.
With swords.
And they just storm the castle, and there's a scene where King Math, standing right at the gates, has his sword out, and the Cauldron-born dispassionately cut him down and just keep walking through. And they just burn Caer Dathel to the ground, and it's like, oh, it's if the Battle of Pelennor Fields went bad.
Yeah. Gwydion becomes the High King.
Yeah. And Gwydion's like, well, we got one shot.
Yeah.
Aran sent everything here.
Yeah,
If
so
we
basically the plan is like, okay, so if he sent the Cauldron-born, that means now Anuvin is
relatively
defenseless, less defended than before. So they decide Gwydion is going to take his troops and just like get there as fast as possible. But Taran's like, the Cauldronborn are definitely going to turn around and your guys are just going to get trapped there. So then Taran's group, basically, their job is just to slow down the Cauldronborn. Just do whatever they can to like stop them from getting there as soon as possible.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Because you expect the heroes to be on the like beeline for the castle, assassinate the king quest.
Yeah.
And instead our heroes are on the long slog through the mountains, throw rock at invincible skeletons and hope it works.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting moment where they have to choose. It's like, okay, we either try and deal with the Cauldronborn over easier ground in the Red Fallows, which apparently used to be beautiful, but all these lords fighting over it turned it sterile and dead.
Common theme in these books.
Yeah, and Call is like, my years as a warrior, I spent most of them fighting over this land. And now it's like dead and barren, which is an interesting relation to his like dedication as like a gardener and like a farmer.
We get a lot of Call, which is a bad sign.
Yeah. It's like, uh-oh.
We get all his hopes and dreams and his promises to Taran and his backstory and, where'd he go? No, where'd he go?
So they determined we want to turn the Cauldronborn away from the Red Fallows because they'll be able to get back faster. We want to turn them into the hills. And even though it'll be harder for us, they'll have a tougher time moving too. And the way I picture it, it's sort of described maybe they kind of build some fortifications, but it seems like there's existing fortifications that are still sort of there. They're like, we can head off the Cauldronborn from this area because the Cauldronborn, it's like sort of vague. Like the longer they're away from a Nuven,
the weaker they get.
Yeah. And so like they can only spend so much energy trying to break through the barricades that our heroes put up before they're like, we just got to turn around and walk a different way.
It's basically like they're playing tower defense
with
the Cauldronborn. Yeah. And they lose a lot of people on the way.
Yeah. And Call, there's like a contingent that breaks away from the main one, and Call's able to kind of hold him back for one last heave, but he gets wounded. And like, Call had spent like a lot of his interactions whenever Taran talks to him. It almost reminds me of like a video game where you go back to talk to a character and they say their thing.
Yeah.
Taran's like, what do you think about this? And Call's like,
turnips.
I just want to get back to my turnips. Like my garden's going to look pretty bad. And I was like, oh, Cole. But when he's lying there dying and Call knows it, he's like, I know my own death wound. And Taran just doesn't want to believe it. And he's like, no, we're going to go back. And even though the interaction is kind of the same, where Call's like, my turnips. Like I was feeling it and I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
No, Call.
So sad.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Ka has a mini-sode.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ka goes back to Noah.
Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
Or
Medwin's
He straight up
Valley.
says, like, and I built the big boat.
Yeah.
And put 2 animals on the boat. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, they're just saying it now. He's Noah.
Yeah. Ka outmaneuvers like a bunch of Gwithaints and gets help from Medwin. And Medwin, important detail, is like, so Iran's on the march. Send word to all the animals of the landscape.
Yeah, basically
Kill the bad guys.
Which comes in handy because Eilonwy and Gurgi get kidnapped by Dorath.
Yeah.
Freaking Dorath. Get out of here.
Yeah. So Dorath kidnaps them. And they're trying to like negotiate their way out, but like he's not giving in.
Eilonwy's totally undaunted because she is. But Dorath makes some like very distinct threats towards Eilonwy that rereading it as an adult, I was like, whoa.
Yikes.
Lloyd Alexander.
Yeah.
Well, I thought these books were for kids. Okay. I mean, it's not extremely clear, but it's very much implied that Dorath intends to do very serious harm. And then Medwin's wolves bust out of the woods
and eat him alive.
And
all his friends.
And Eilonwy's cracking jokes within like half a minute.
We were talking about how like Eilonwy takes the whole massacre in stride, and meanwhile Gurgi's in the corner just effectively traumatized. Gurgi's like, oh my god, there's blood everywhere. And Eilonwy's like, yeah, there's blood everywhere. This is great.
Eilonwy is really funny in this book because every single book before where they're going on a quest, she wants to go and they're always like, you can't go. And then she like out-stubborns them or like sneaks her way in basically. This time she's like, I know you're not going to let me go, but I'm also just going to conveniently put myself on the quest. This is like what she's learned in like her lady in court training or whatever.
There's like a funny moment in the like Pelennor Fields battle where Eilonwy shows up like spear and shield in hand next to Taran, and Taran's like, I told you not to be out here. And she's like, whatever.
Yeah, she's like, and you thought that would work?
Yeah. Taran's like, okay.
He's like, we're in the middle of a fight. It's too late.
Lonio dies in the Battle of Pelennor Fields as well.
Oh, yeah.
And which is the last we see of him. He's described as basically carving a bloody path through the battlefield. Like he's wearing like he's the luck guy.
He's wearing like pots and pans.
Well, yeah, basically like Lonio shows up because Taran's like, okay, we got the smith guy and we're like trying to like basically put together an armory, but it's still not enough and we don't have time to craft all these weapons. And then Lonio shows up and he's like, what if we took a pitchfork and just like cut off like the 3 points of it and then put them onto sticks. And then you basically turn one pitchfork into 3 spears.
Yeah.
What a guy.
What a guy. Didn't make it.
Didn't make it.
Yeah.
He's got like 15 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Luckily, he lives in the comets.
With one more on the way.
Aren't they like twins on the way?
Something like that.
Something. Yeah. They're twins somewhere.
But they live in the free comotes, so they'll be taken care of.
Yeah.
I just remembered that the Potter died.
Yeah.
I was getting there. The Potter dies too. I was like, no!
They're rallying the comotes.
And then Taran like carries like a shard of pottery with him for like the rest of
They discover there's like huntsmen or like Iran's evildoers, whatever, in the field. And Taran, as the war leader, is like, okay, we have a chance to deal with them. He goes out, has a successful battle, and it's like, oh, clean deal. Nope. Turns out a bunch of them swept behind their lines, and Anla dies, and Taran's like, oh no!
Yeah.
So sad. After Eilonwy and Gurgi get saved by the wolves, then they decide we got to catch up to Taran and the rest of the crew. They get there just when they're about to like go into like some caverns.
With all the free folk.
With the free
They
folk.
find a free folk army.
But then Eilonwy, from her higher vantage point, she can see that.
They're about to run into a different army of huntsmen.
Yeah. And so basically, like, they'd be trapped. They would just come out of the caverns and then be screwed. She basically is like, okay, the solution is I'm just going to raise my bauble and I'm going to make it as bright as possible. And she basically turns it from, like, night to, like, noon.
It's like her ultimate enchantress moment.
Yeah, and so she
like
lights up the sky. Everyone's like, oh, my gosh. And then Taran sees, like, oh, shoot, we're about to, like, basically get ambushed. Oh, we forgot to talk about the prophecy, because there's a prophecy in this book.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's another fascinating detail. They're like, we need Henwin to give us this prophecy, but Henwin's so afraid, and it's Taran's assistant pig keeper abilities.
Yeah, he like calms down Henwin, and she manages to give basically like 2 sticks worth of prophecy, but she like can't do the third one, and then the third one explodes, and they're like, I guess we're gonna find out what happens at the end.
The prophecy is basically like, oh, it's going to be bad. Oh, wow, it sucks. Oh, it's impossible. And they're all like, oh, okay, we're just going to ignore that.
Yeah.
And I forgot the prophecy existed until this moment when Eilonwy realizes, like, oh, we just fulfilled 2 points of the prophecy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Turn night to day. I just did that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a chance now.
Yeah. And
On
then
we go.
They get to Anuvin.
Yeah, they climb the mountain, and that's when they find Akron face down in the mud. Like, how did you get up here?
Oh, yeah, it's like snowing heavily the entire book.
Yeah, it's winter.
Which is a totally different vibe than any other book.
Yeah.
And they're just freezing to death. And they don't
They're
have
like,
any
we might not
firewood.
even make it after like everything we've done, because like there's nothing to burn. And then Fluter, he like breaks his harp and he's like, this will be our fire. And first Taran is like, you're an idiot. Like, this will only burn for all of like 1 minute most.
He's a little more sympathetic.
I know, okay, but it kind of read as he was basically like, why did you do that? Like, that's your harp. But because it's a magic harp, it lasts the entire night. It plays a song. I was like, it feels horrible to say this after like so many horrible like loss of human life in this book. But I was so devastated. I was like, not the harp. I think it's also because like there's already so much that's been lost too.
Yeah.
And then now this stupid harp also.
No, I totally agree. It's the saddest death in the book, is Fluter's harp. Because we get a whole scene where he like dedicates himself to the harp.
Yeah, like he
beginning.
chooses the harp. The harp chooses him.
And then, like, when it's in the fire and he's like, I won't miss it. And the string,
Yeah.
bing, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
But
And-
it's interesting that for the rest of the book, like, whenever he tells a lie, he'll impulsively look over his shoulder.
No.
He has a
but-
tick now.
Yeah, he has a
But
tick.
he stops. It worked. He
Yeah.
stops lying.
So sad.
And then they get to the castle.
And, like, the Cauldron-born are there. Gwydion and his army are there, and the Cauldron-born are arriving after them. Like, everyone's arriving at the same time. And it's like, oh, everyone's going to lose. And the Cauldronborn start climbing the peak where Taran and his people are.
Mm-hmm.
And Taran finds where Dernwyn is hidden, very luckily.
Well, first he pushes a rock down on some of the Cauldronborn.
That very
and then
important.
hidden behind the rock is the sword.
Yeah, he's like, oh.
Which,
nice.
when I was reading it, I was like, this feels a little bit too convenient, but it's fine, whatever.
It's the same hiding strategy that the fingerbone
Oh,
was
yeah,
hidden
yeah,
with.
that's true.
Which is just, I'll just put it in here.
Like, it's like, this is literally like the one thing that can like destroy you. I'm just gonna put it in a hole in nature.
Clearly in Prydain, there's some sort of like evil bad guy secret weapon handbook.
I think it makes more sense for Aran. I mean, they do say something along the lines of, oh, it was too powerful even to be stored in his walls. But like, if you're Aran and you're surrounded by people that are like, I get your crown when you're dead, right? I get your crown. You'd be like, I'm going to take the sword that can cause me a bunch of problems and I'm not going to store it in like a really great box.
That's true,
in
yeah.
my house where people are going to look. I'm going to go out to the woods or like to the top of a mountain and I'm just going to put it in the ground.
Because like, who in their right mind would climb all the way to the top of this mountain and then move this big rock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oops.
Taran draws the sword.
And it doesn't go nuclear.
Yeah, because in the
Kill
first
him.
book, he tries to draw it, and immediately it's like,
Nope.
absolutely not. So it's a very good full circle moment. And then he realizes, like, it's the only thing that can truly kill the Cauldronborn. Isn't it like he stabs one and they all just die?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cinematic. It says everything about, in addition to, of course, all the adventures Taran has had. It's like, if you needed proof, magical proof, here it is. Like, book 1, he's just a punk kid, and the sword rejects him. Book 5, he's not even thinking about worthiness or anything. He's just like, oh, here's the sword Dernwyn. Oh, it's the Cauldronborn. Everyone's in trouble. Whips out the sword, blazes with fire, stabs the Cauldronborn, and like it like screams. Like they're deathly silent all the time. But like the sword basically breaks the magic that binds them, and like they just die.
He was using it as a sword, not as a magical item.
Yeah.
And the armies of good are like, oh, get in the castle. Get in
Yeah.
the castle. Go.
Taran ulted, get in the castle.
Yeah. And then he goes to the castle and.
Play the game.
Sorry. I just realized what you said.
Play of the game.
He gets to the castle and then he finds Gwydion. And then Gwydion's like, oh, you got the sword. Put that away. Put that away right now. And he's like, oh, okay. And then Gwydion's like, he says like, oh, like we could like take over the castle and like we could split the treasure or whatever. And then Taran's like, wait a minute. That's like, this is
put
like
in the
treason.
Among Us sound effect.
Yeah.
Gwydion's also like, you dumb little piece of crap.
Yeah.
How did you stupid little worthless worm, draw the sword? Anyway, give it to me. Give me the sword.
Aran with like the least subtle, the biggest
Aran's
L.
good at the facade of it, but like anytime a villain pretends to be a character, it's always like something about the way they interact with them is what gives it away.
Yeah.
Real quick, Taran's like, Walt, I think we have an imposter among us. Taran whips out Dernwyn again, and he's like, I'm gonna get you. And then Aran just like vanishes in a blur.
Yeah.
I really thought that was it. I really thought Taran would be like, all right, sure, Gwydion, and then just like stab him. I was convinced. So when it didn't, I was like, oh.
I was gonna say, like, because Taran's still looking for Gwydion because he's trying to give him the sword back.
Yeah.
Like, Taran's like, I just used this sword to kill the Cauldronborn. Like, clearly, like, I'm quote unquote worthy enough to use this sword, but he's not thinking of himself using it still. He's still like, this is Gwydion's sword, so I'm going to bring it back to him. So then the next time he encounters the real Gwydion, he's like, here, do you want your sword back? And Gwydion's like, nah, man, it's yours now.
What a guy.
Yeah.
And then they find Mag, and
Older
Mag,
brother hand-me-downs. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mag puts on the greed hat and then melts. And meanwhile, Glue, we get another Glue. He's like, let's find the treasure room. And Gurgi's like, they told me to keep an eye on you because
They
you're
know
probably
you're
gonna
trouble.
go find the treasure room. And Glue's like, he grabs the bad treasure and it like tries to blow up on him, and Gurgi has to save him.
Yeah, Gurgi literally pulls him out of an explosion.
Gurgi MVP, Glue,
Yeah.
the opposite of whatever that is.
Glue.
Yeah.
And they make it into the chamber, and Aran's not there, and Akron's like, oh, wait a minute, there's a snake sneaking up on Taran. Grabs the snake bites her, and she dies, and then Taran turns and swipes it in half.
And then the sword's fire dies, because that was part of the prophecy, which was the sword's fire will be extinguished, which they thought was a bad thing, because if they lose their powerful sword, then they lose hope of defeating Aran. But it turns out defeating him is what takes away the fire because this sword is the only thing that can actually kill him.
Yeah.
And they're like, hooray!
Yeah. And then the very next chapter, they're already home.
And if I could, very briefly,
Yes.
Yeah.
we get like a Caw chapter of just like crow antics, but we also get a Dalbin chapter.
Oh, yes.
Of Dalbin antics.
Yes.
While like this massive like continent-spanning war, because we get descriptions of like battles all over the place. The entire kingdom has risen up. Dalbin's just like chilling at home with Henwin, and Henwin's like freaking out, and Dalbin's like, it's time. And you're like, Dalbin, what does that mean? And Dalbin walks outside, and King Prydain, who the last time we saw him was leading a massive army to victory over the High King's castle.
Yeah.
Like, this is a huge military victory, is just walking up on Dalbin with like 20 guys. And you're thinking, where did your army go, King Prydain? What happened between massive military victory and let me go beat up this old man with my 20 best friends?
Yeah.
And Dalbin casts a bunch of spells and scares off all the ruffians, except King Prydain. He's like, I know you, Dalbin. You can't kill anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And Dalbin's like, you're absolutely right. What do you want? And Prydain's like, I want the Book of 3 because it's like a bunch of powerful prophecies. And Dalbin's like, you can't have it. And guess what? If you kill me, then my thumb will leave the thermal detonator and we'll all die.
Yeah. He's basically like surrounded the entire place with fire. So it's like as soon as Dalbin dies, then the whole place goes on fire.
Which is definitely Dalbin killing a guy.
It's like, I got you, Dalbin. You can't kill anyone. It's like, clearly you only read the first sentence of the long document of exceptions for me killing someone.
And then Prydain picks up the Book of 3 and opens it, and the book goes, nah, and like melts him. And Dalbin's like sick.
Dalbin just like sighs and he's like, yeah, well, that happened.
Back to my nap.
It's definitely like Prydain had the army, and I think he, like, for movement's sake and for stealth-wise, he just had to hoof it across the continent. So that's why it's me and my 20 best friends. But yeah, Prydain, you're playing yourself, man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Dalbin even comments on it where he's like, okay, so either this is like a huge insult to me and how little they think of my power, or they decided like, we're just going to send 20 of our best guys.
Yeah. A strike team of our most capable warriors.
Yeah.
And then Dalbin makes a scary breeze in the woods and half of them run away.
A part of me really wanted like epic wizard fight against an army though. Like we get 5 books of Dalbin being like, I'm tired. I would love just one moment of Dalbin being like, I cast Disintegrate's army. And you're like, whoa.
I think that's what that's supposed to be. There is a cool moment where, like, after he does the scary breeze in the woods, a bunch of them are like running out toward him, and he like creates like a fire in his hands, and it turns into like 5 tendrils that like start harassing him.
He also makes
an
an earthquake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is pretty cool.
He's a cool old man.
Cool old man.
But we're sort of jumping ahead here, but a point that I love is that at the end of the book, Taran gets the Book of 3 as sort of like a symbol of you have completed your character arc. And it's because the Book of 3 was a book of prophecy, but no more. And it's actually become basically a description of Taran's life. And so when King Prydain gets his hand on the book, if it wasn't enchanted, he would have opened the book, excited to see his future, and instead have gotten the Chronicles of Prydain, which is to him now is completely useless.
Yeah.
He would have just gotten like Taran chapter 1, flip, 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 Taran chapter 12, flip, and he's like, what is this? And Dalbin's like, that's my Taran fan fiction.
Yeah.
And then Prydain would have had to sit down and have a real hard think about his life choices.
I killed the High King.
For fan fiction.
For who's Lloyd Alexander? But regardless, everyone returns to Caer Dalbin, all the survivors anyway. And Dalbin makes a surprise announcement. Hey, all the sons of Dawn have to go home now. We have to decolonize Prydain.
Which is like, oh, wow.
Wow. All right, cool.
I'd forgotten the whole lore about the Sons of Dawn, so I was just like, wait, what? They have to leave? I was like, what's happening?
Yeah, they're like, remember, the Sons of Dawn came here way back when to keep Iran from doing bad things. And now Iran's dead, so now they all got to go back to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And then it was like
Summer
Fluter
country.
has to go because he's also related to the Sons of Dawn.
Fluter's like, I was not aware of this.
Yeah.
I did not. Wait, hold on. I'm pretty cool here. And they're like, sorry, Fluter. No
Fluter's like,
argument.
I
Get
just
on the
wanted to be a bard. And then Eilonwy has to go because also all enchanters have to leave. Like Dalbin has to leave. All the fair folk have to. They don't have to leave, but they're
retreating underground.
They're retreating
and
underground, and
sealing
then
themselves off.
they will never interact with humanity again.
And they'll start a big war with a bunch of giant rats. Gurgi gets to go because he's a hero.
Yeah, and so then they're basically like, and then a
Blue.
few exceptions because of your dedication to the cause and whatnot, and so Taran, Gurgi, and Glue
For reasons.
because whatever, okay.
No one there is excited about Glue coming either. He's like, oh, well, Gurgi saved me, and that's me admitting my faults. And they're like, I guess. Fine.
He helped, however, unwittingly. And I'm like, I don't know if he did.
Yeah.
Maybe
did
he
it.
carried some stuff on the way, but
I really thought about it, and besides helping Rune's character arc, he did nothing.
Yeah.
He didn't even accidentally help. For me personally, he's not as bad as Gwistel because Gwistel is fully competent but disguises it in a guise of incompetence. But even in situations where there's no one around to trick, they need his competence, he still refuses to be competent. Glue is actively incompetent and revels in it.
Yeah.
But not in a positive I know who I am King Rune style, but in a delusional I deserve the best Glue style. He's the opposite of Glue. He doesn't bring anyone together.
Yeah. It's an interesting, book one, we get the whole, who cares who gets the glory if you all shared the same danger? And Glue really puts that philosophy to the test.
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess he was there. I guess he can come along.
And poor Fluter has to put up with him for eternity now.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I was joking with Jino the other day that, after some section of eternity with Glue around complaining, Glue's gonna wake up one morning and, summer camp prank style, his mattress is gonna be in the middle of the ocean.
Because Victoria, he would be complaining about, oh, life is so long. Oh, eternity is so long.
Yeah, he'd be like, life was better in Prydain.
Oh, and they're like, fine, go back.
Anyway, so Taran's very excited because he's like, yay, now I can marry Eilonwy. He's like, oh, if you want Eilonwy. And she's like, yeah, you idiot, I'll marry you.
That's right, because briefly before this, I love this chapter. The witches visit Taran again because they're like, we're going away too.
No, that happens after he asks Eilonwy to marry him.
Yes, he does ask
Taran
Eilonwy.
decides, he's like, yay, this is great, let's go. And then...
Because Taran's invited as well.
Yeah. And then that night, he's
restless.
He's restless. He's it's basically eternal life. It's
no sickness. It's
no
super
sickness.
heaven.
It's super heaven, like we said. And he's got everything he wants. Everyone's gonna. I think even Henwen gets to go because she's the oracular pig.
Good. Deserved. Oh, also Henwen has kids.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Henwen
Surprise!
has kids.
A boar showed up, a wild boar.
Dalvin was a very charismatic boar.
Dalvin's
I was Dalvin, we did not need.
That was upsetting to me.
Take it easy, Dalvin.
Taran's like, oh, Henwen has babies. I was like, how? No. Don't tell me. Dalvin's like, oh yeah, we had a guest. And I was like, Dalvin, no. Don't let that happen. Just no.
Dalvin literally slept through all this and was like, oh, whoops. I'll just play it off like it was intentional and this is normal.
Because the entire animal kingdom has risen up in defiance of Ron, except for this one boar was like, I'm going to head in the opposite direction because I heard. No!
There's a bachelorette this one.
And then didn't even stick around.
Yeah, he left her a single mom.
Deadbeat.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Anyways, okay, so Taran basically on paper gets everything that he wants. But that night he's still very restless. And then the three witches show up. They're like, you thought we were all old crones, didn't you? Well, we're actually beautiful women.
Reading The Foundling and Tales of Prydain, it's when Dalvin takes the Book of Three and leaves them, because he was a foundling for them, he gets basically all the information in the world. And he's able to see the witches for what they are, which is literally just kind of personifications of reality in a weird way. There is a very much 3 crones, but we're actually beautiful. It seems like, because they say we're heading out as well, but we're not leaving with everyone else.
Yeah.
So I'm like, are they just like disincorporating into like the world? But they give them like this tapestry. We've
like,
seen them weaving on their loom this whole time.
Oh yes, this was a cool moment.
And it's like, Taran's like, it's my life.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, pretty cool, huh?
He's like, he thought this entire time that they were kind of like the fates who like weave his destiny for him. But they basically are like, no, like your entire life was created by you. And we're just weaving the story of your decisions. And then he says, well, but it's not finished. And they're like, yeah, because you haven't decided yet how it's going to end.
I really like that.
Yeah.
There's prophecy, but there's also like self-determination.
Yeah, and going back to the Book of 3, they describe the Book of 3 as not necessarily a prophecy book, like this will happen. It's a book of ifs. So it's like, if Taran decided to become a potter, if Taran decided to become a weaver, like all of these things would shift his destiny. Dallben says, like, I found you as a baby, but I didn't know if you were going to become the prophesied one. I hoped that you would be, and it seemed like a lot of things were lining up, but every decision that Taran made along the way could have steered him down a different path, and it was all his own choosing. It's not until the very end, when he actually defeats Iran, that the prophecy is fulfilled.
It's one step after that, I think. Because Taran chooses, like, after the witches give him...
Oh, right. Yes.
The witches do say, I love them so much. They go, here it is unfinished, because there's a bunch of threads left. And Taran's like, what's the rest of it? And they're like, we don't know. You're the one who's making it. And they say, you must still choose the pattern. So must each of you poor, perplexed fledglings, as long as thread remains to be woven. And Taran says, but no longer do I see mine clearly. No longer do I understand my own heart. Why does my grief shout on my joy? He is debating whether or not to leave or stay. And he's like, tell me this much. Give me to know this as one last boon. And Ordu says, dear chicken, when in truth did we really give you anything? And you're like, whoa.
No.
Yeah.
And then they were gone.
And so Taran wakes up the next morning and they're all ready to leave. And then he goes up to Dallben and he says, I'm sorry, but I can't go. And Dalben's like, I was hoping that you would say that. And he's like, the prophecy is fulfilled.
Taran resolves it because he's like, this whole time I've been talking to people who had plans for what they were going to do after the war. And like a bunch of them died. And I told them I would ensure like, Rune, I'll make sure your seawall gets built. Cole, I'll make sure the garden is tended, this and that. And they're not here to do those things.
Yeah.
Prydain has been left like in all kinds of ruins. And
yeah, I think like after all his travels, like he feels a huge sense of responsibility to the people that he met too. Like they don't get to just pick up and leave Prydain.
Yeah, they don't get to go to super happy.
Yeah, this like enchanted land. They're just gonna have to like fend for themselves. And Taran's like, I don't think I can just leave them. So he doesn't. And so he's like, honestly, I just wanted to be an assistant pig keeper. And Dallben's like, well, unfortunately, man, you can't because you're the king now. And Taran's like, oh, shoot. Okay.
And then we come to a part of this book that I want to like ask y'all about, especially you, Victoria, is that at the end of this book, we get this sort of ultimate choice that Taran makes. I want to stay instead of go. I want to foster these connections, my duty that I feel to my communities and people around me and help them out. And Eilonwy ultimately makes the same choice. There's this moment where she's saying, Taran is saying goodbye to everyone, even loyal Gurgi. And then Eilonwy tries to say goodbye. And then she just goes back to being Eilonwy. And she's like, this is stupid.
Yeah.
Why can't I? Well, I didn't ask to be an enchantress. I didn't ask for this power. I didn't ask for any of this. It's always just been like something.
It's not fair.
Yeah. Like, why can't I stay? And Dallben's like, I was waiting for you to ask of your own volition. All you have to do is use the ring that Gwydion gave you at the end of book 1, which has had a wish spell in it this whole time. And I was only going to let you know now because
you decided yourself.
Yeah. It'll fulfill the wish of your own heart. And Eilonwy's like, she basically wishes for her enchanted powers to go away so she can stay. And then it's like, great, you can stay. For me, Taran making this choice at the end of the book is like the ultimate sort of decision. The fact that Eilonwy has to make the same choice, even though it is partly about being with Taran, it's still choosing to stay, and as Dallben puts it, choosing instead of a life of joy, a life of sorrow, which isn't like a bad thing. It's just like a fact, because Dallben's like, all these things you want to do, Taran, may not work out.
Yeah, it's like you're staying to help these people, but
with no
there
guarantee.
might be more wars.
Yeah.
There might be more suffering. you don't know. Because this is another thing I also made note of where Taran's like, well, but it'll be fine because we defeated Iran. Like, evil is gone. And they're like, evil didn't die when Iran died. There's still evil in the world. It's basically like the choice of people choosing to be good that keeps evil at bay, which I thought was really important to say.
Yeah. So the fact that Eilonwy kind of has to make the same choice says to me that, like, a future adaptation of this work would really benefit, and I've talked about this before, with more Eilonwy in it. And it almost begs an exploration of Eilonwy's development. I don't want to, like, get too gendered with it, but it is like a societal expectation thing. Taran has expectations placed upon him, some that he ingests in himself, of like what it is to be a man. And he's got a bunch of misconceptions that he's got to unwind. Eilonwy has a lot of expectations placed on her about what it is to be like a lady. And she kind of has it already figured out. But it would be interesting in an adaptation to get a similar journey from her, I think, such that her decision at the end of book 5, being alike to Taran's, has the same weight. And I wanted to ask you both, like, what would you do with Eilonwy if you spent more time with her? What would you give her in terms of screen time? What would be her dilemmas and overcomings?
One thing that would definitely be interesting to see is like what role models she had in her upbringing. Because once she goes to the island of Mona, all of her character development basically happens off screen. She just comes back and she's like, well, I like did these things and it's really annoying. But you can tell that she's changed, just not why she's changed. And so we don't see any of that journey. But I think like the reason why Taran's decision has so much weight is because we watched his entire journey, but specifically, we saw all of the people he met that made an impact on him. So I think like similarly with Eilonwy, it'd be interesting to see like what role models she had, or maybe not role models, but like people she met where she's like, I don't want that life. Maybe I want parts of that life. And she starts figuring out for herself what she actually wants, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Very much so.
I think maybe there's an opportunity when Taran goes wandering that we also get a similar sort of development for Eilonwy, and we'd be able to see that as sort of like a parallel storytelling of her learning not just like responsibility of leadership, but like burden of leadership and like importance of leveraging granted power to like lead and build community, I guess.
Yeah.
Like she's been given this opportunity, and instead of like pushing it away or like squandering it, she has the opportunity and almost like the obligation to make lives better. And I think that would create an Eilonwy during the war who's in more of like a leadership position instead of like a support position. And I think that would help feed into like this choice at the end of like she also understands the responsibility of like helping people. She wouldn't just be like in Mona the whole time learning lessons and such. But I think it may benefit the storyline to see her like maybe not like wandering like Taran does, but like a similar like exploration of the country and the people and just like meeting people and stuff. Because like as much as I want Eilonwy to just like hang out with Taran more, I think it is also important for Taran to have like a solo journey or a quirky journey, I should say. That being said, I think an adaptation would desperately need a lot more just Taran and Eilonwy scenes.
Yeah.
Especially in book 5 of just them hanging out and talking about like the things they've learned and the experiences they've had, and also just like understanding each other and like getting into arguments and stuff.
Yeah.
Like not only is it important, but it's like it's really satisfying to like finally have them communicating in a way that's healthy in book 5, and then it's devastating that we don't get much more than like a couple of instances of it.
Yeah.
That's my pitch.
No, these are great. Like these are things I haven't particularly thought of. My mind has mainly gone to her relationship with like enchantment. Okay, backtracking a little bit in terms of concept, there's like a lot of sacrifice in this like last book in particular. And Taran kind of has to sacrifice whatever, super heaven, but he also has to sacrifice other things along his journey. And Eilonwy at the end has to sacrifice her nature as an enchantress. There's a version of that feels bad, like to be with a man she's willing to kill a part of herself. But there's a different telling of it that you'd have to massage, which is in order to have a life together, these two people have to not kill parts of themselves, but sacrifice a version of themselves that they could have been in one way to be versions of themselves together. any exploration of Eilonwy and her relationship with enchantment, which is already kind of there in terms of her like antagonism toward it as this heritage that she didn't really choose, that has only ever tried to like hem her in.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting because Eilonwy doesn't love being an enchanter. And so her sacrifice doesn't feel as difficult at the end because it's like, well, she didn't want to do that anyways. This is random, but I do think that it'd be interesting to explore a friendship between King Rune and Eilonwy.
Yeah.
Because I think Rune kind of has a similar, like, I was born into this position and maybe I'm not the best suited for it, but that's just kind of what I have to make my peace with and I have to do my best with it. So I think he would actually have very interesting insights to give to Eilonwy when she's like, man, I didn't want to be a princess either. I think they could have some very interesting conversations about their respective positions in life.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to, like, clearly there's so much potential that could be explored with Eilonwy, whether it's like within the confines of the plot structure that Lloyd Alexander has already set out. Like if you were like, okay, we can explore Eilonwy's character more, but she can't leave Mona. Like we have to like just explore what her life was there. I think there's still a lot of possibilities, but I also think it'd be really interesting if an adaptation was like, maybe we'll just change some aspects of like Eilonwy's journey and just like see where else she goes. Because it is a book of ifs,
It is
after
a book
all.
of ifs. Ooh.
If I could also pitch, I think there's also potential for exploring Eilonwy and Oghren's relationship more, especially post Oghren losing her powers.
Yes.
Interesting.
Because Oghren is such like an antagonistic force, like an omnipresent force in Eilonwy's life. And to suddenly have the tables turned where now Eilonwy is the one with powers and Oghren is the one literally doing the chores, which Eilonwy like enjoys. And so it puts Eilonwy in a position of like knowledge and power over Oghren. Also like having to face her like captor and like possibly abuser as well. So I think that would be a dark way to go.
Yeah.
Gives me She-Ra vibes with Shadow Weaver. Interesting that you say after, because that's very true. Because my thoughts end up going to like book 3 and it's like the before.
Oh yeah, her relationship with Oghren, like when she was in captivity.
I just thought it was strange that like Eilonwy and Oghren are in the same place in the beginning of book 5 and they don't ever really interact with each other.
Yeah.
You'd feel like there would be something.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least some acknowledgement of like what their relationship was compared to where they are now.
I think there's a lot in here that's sort of, not only for the time, I suppose, but in general, like subversive. That first book is a big hurdle to get over in adaptation. The fact that like the end is like a Deus Ex Gwydion.
Yeah.
My greatest fear would be that an adaptation would focus more on the idea of these stories as more of a straightforward fantasy, like empowerment story, when they're really more like an embracement story, an embracement of the self and of the people around you. Harder to tell by most conventional storytelling standards. Compels me though. Hey. Thanks for reading these books with me.
Thanks for sharing these books.
What a wonderful time.
Yeah, they're really great.
And now I can phone in the rest of these Nostalgia Club episodes. No, it's good. I'm very excited. I'm just very excited. What a fun time we have here.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions you want to ask, Michael?
Favorite character?
I mean, I think I've already said Fluter. He's just so dependable, but he's also not like impeccable. Like he makes mistakes and like sometimes he's just wrong.
Victoria?
I mean, I love Gurgi, clearly, based on this episode. I think I just like Gurgi because he's always there and he just like refuses to let Taran be alone ever. Like, it's not even annoying because he's just like so steadfast and he really truly believes that he's meant to be by Taran's side until the very end when Taran's like, thank you for being with me, but you can go enjoy the summer country now.
Go find your wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aw.
Which I would argue he already has plenty of.
Yes.
And I just love book 5 Oghren, not as a character, but as a concept.
I just think it's so interesting what they chose to do with Oghren's character that is not typical. I was going to say, like, in an adaptation, potentially they would have changed Oghren's book 5 character completely, I would say.
Yeah.
I think they would have made her, like, have a stronger character arc, I guess, instead of just, like, riding off and then disappearing and then, like, being on the ground when they find her. Yeah.
Favorite book?
I really enjoyed book 4. And then book 5, the ending, I think, made me appreciate it a lot.
I agree. I think book 5 had a good ending. A nice Percy Jackson-esque, giving it immortality ending. But I agree, book 4 is my favorite.
Yeah.
Same. I just love a guy who appreciates honest work, and also I felt so vindicated after suffering through the sequel trilogy of Star Wars. I know I keep bringing this back as like a joke, but seriously, J.J. Abrams could never. He quivers in fear at Taran Wanderer.
I was
shakes
gonna say,
in his boots.
Taran Wanderer has like a similar premise, quote unquote, to Rey's journey. I don't even remember what. In The Rise of Skywalker?
God,
just like, or like overall,
Last
like,
Jedi, right?
in The Last Jedi, where she's like, I gotta find who my parents were. And I thought it was gonna end like Taran's story. I thought it was gonna be like, she has no family, or like, she's not from like any like major, like important family or whatever. She's just Rey. That's how it should have been.
It's
Taran
like
Wanderer
if Taran was like, oh, my dad's Death Lord Orion.
Yeah.
Because we have Darth Vader for Luke, and then Palpatine's even older. It would be like Ocaran being like, you're secretly my son. And it's like, oh,
like, what do I do with that?
It just, that's what I wanted The Rise of Skywalker to be, and it wasn't. And so, dang.
They defeat Palpatine for the second time, and then Obi-Wan's Force Ghost comes out and says, and now you can all go to super heaven.
I did also just want to say, get back to like favorite character. Eilonwy is still one of my favorite characters. It's just that I'm still just like, we needed more of her. It's like hard for her to be my favorite character when it's like we barely saw her. But definitely when I was reading book 3, like literally like my first note was young Victoria would have resonated so hard with Eilonwy. Because like she's in book 3, she's just like, I don't want to be a lady. I just want, like, I'm doing my thing. Just let me do my thing. I don't want to wear dresses or whatever. The dedication in book 5 I thought was nice. It says, for the boys who might have been Taran and the girls who will always be Eilonwy.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Eilonwy potential arc. A Toph arc.
Oh,
where Eilonwy,
Avatar.
yes, where Eilonwy never truly accepts or likes her nobility and enchantress sides, but learns to leverage them to her advantage instead of outright rejecting them.
Yeah. Which I think is kind of what she does in book 5.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, you don't see a lot of it, but that's where she's like, I'm just gonna like wear men's clothes and like braid my hair up, and I'm gonna join the battle and you can't stop me because I'm a princess, you know? Like, what are you gonna do? Tell me no.
Because I'm Eilonwy.
Yeah, so.
I really like that too. It becomes like an aspect of her, as opposed to like a defining thing of her. And it's like, if she went one way, that could become a more important aspect of her.
Yeah.
Not like something that makes or breaks her definition of herself. But if she goes another way, it could become a lesser important aspect of her. And either one wouldn't matter because she would know she would still be Eilonwy.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a version of the way enchantments work, like the fact that not only the Sons of Dawn and also the Daughters of Dawn, who are off somewhere in the East that they mention once, I think.
Oh, I didn't even
They're like,
catch
the Sons
that.
of Dawn must leave, and also the Daughters of Dawn, who are elsewhere in the East. And I'm like, what? Okay.
The women, they exist. We never see them.
I want to know about them. What are they doing?
What's going on? I'm sure it's like a reference to myth or something that Lloyd Alexander was like, this is fun for me. There's a lot of examples of this more so in everything leading up to book 5, but a lot of enchantments, and even in The Foundling, The Tales of Prydain, when we talk about Eilonwy's mother's backstory, enchantment is like something that belongs to the powerful. Enchantment is something that, like, people who are enchanters or leverage enchantment typically have grand aims and major ambitions, and they're using it for, like, geopolitical ends or to make themselves appear especially powerful. And they're using it to make up for perceived weakness. Like, a lot of fantasy, coming-of-age fantasy especially, involves, like, acquiring a bunch of individual power, and I almost feel like some of that is, like, you're falling for it. You're engaging in the same systems that have oppressed and caused all this trouble and violence, and you're doing the thing that kind of your reality demands that you do, but is falling into the same notion of like, I have to become, it's the anime hero thing. It's like, I've got to get stronger so that no one can hurt me and my friends. And it's like, yeah, and it's noble ends, and you got to do it probably, but you're also in the same trap. And these books kind of have a different take where it's like, I'm not getting stronger. I'm making myself and everyone around me more connected and able to weather any storm, even if individually none of us can necessarily stand up to like one super powerful dude.
I like that.
And like a lot of enchantment involves like enchanters being like, nothing can touch me. I put all of my life in my finger. Or like, nothing can touch me. I stay in my house in Anuvan all the time and then send my deathless warriors out. or nothing can touch me. I've groomed this girl from a young age to give me a bunch of power.
If you kill me, you kill this child.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Oh. And Dalbin's the only one who's like, I have infinite power, but like my rule is that I can't do anything with it. My rule is that like I can sort of figure out when things are happening and I can defend myself loosely, but like I'm just here to vibe. And so like I think there's a version of adaptation of these which focuses on that more. And Eilonwy's like greatest power is when like she takes that bauble in book 5 and turns night to day. And you know that in order for it to be that bright, even though like there's enchantress energy flowing through it, we know that Taran can make it light. We know that Rune can make it light. As far as we know, they don't have enchanter stuff going on inside them. That power came from her. That was Eilonwy's like compassion pouring into that Peladrin and turning night to day. And so I like the idea of like, you know, there's like items that are enchanted, which are only as good and capable as the people wielding them. But magical enchantment, all the soft magic stuff, like changing, you know, weather and whatnot. Okay, if we got more Eilonwy, I think a big part of it would be including the backstory of Eilonwy's mother, Angarad, which in the Foundling, Tales of Prydain, she's set to be married to an enchanter. Her mother's like, this is what has to happen. Enchanters and enchantresses on the Isle of Mona, we all marry because we got to keep the bloodlines of enchanters powerful. And Angarad's like, this is dumb, but you know, if there's people coming to see me, I'll check them out. Angrad's literally like, I want to marry for love. And her mother's like, that's nice and preferable, but not always practical in matters of state. And you're like, all right. And the enchanters that come to court Angarad are very much like here on state business. And Angarad's like, you're supposed to be so powerful. Show me some enchantment. This is like core, I think. This is key. The first one who comes up, Angarad's like, let's see some enchantment. He's like, if my references didn't speak for myself, but fine, okay. And he like puts on all this like regalia and spends like an hour like massaging a storm into like the castle chamber. You know, turns night to day in that regard, or day to night rather. And Angarad's like, that's nothing special. All I have to do is wait like 5 hours and night will be here already. With a much more velvety texture and blanketed with stars and a wonderful moon. Can you do that? And he's like, well, I'll make a snowstorm. Everyone loves my snowstorms. And Angarad's like, all I have to do is wait 6 months and winter will be here with a wonderful landscape and a blanket of snow. Like, there's nothing you can do that the world can't already. Yeah.
Wow.
And he's like,
Eilonwy's mother quickly becoming top 5 favorite characters right now.
And like the next person comes by and he's like this. His name is literally Grimgower. And he's like, just so you know, you'll have anything you want, but in my house, I'm the master. And she's like, you suck. She's like, let's see some enchantment. And so he like conjures these monsters, like taken from his own imagination. He's like, you'll find no creatures like these, for I've conjured them from my own thoughts. And she's like, if those are your thoughts, that's messed up.
Yeah.
Moreover, the animals we have in our fields are much nicer to look upon, and you can spend time with them, and they're not locked in anyone's head.
Yeah.
The world has already given me more than you could ever provide. And then the last person who comes in is like a street magician. And he's like, I'm here not to impress you, but to court you. And like spins her some like poetical tales and does a bunch of these cheap magic tricks, but is like actively courting her. Not demonstrating his own power. He's the one that she chooses, and of course they have to elope. But there's this sequence where as they're escaping, these spurned enchanters are like trying to stop them by leveraging all these incredible powers. That one guy turns day to night, and Angarad pulls out the golden Peladrin, and you know that's the power of love represented magically, and that lights their way. The other guy creates those creatures, and because these two lovers aren't a threat and they're moving peaceably, the creatures can't recognize them as a threat, and they bow and let them pass. One creates a snowstorm, and they hold each other close, and with each other's warmth proceed through the storm, and I like that idea of like capital E enchantment is, if anything, like a sign of weakness and a grasping at power and a hiding from the world. And then lowercase e enchantment is like the stuff that people in Prydain encounter, and it's only as good and powerful as they themselves are. I think that would be an interesting exploration and a way to make Eilonwy giving up her enchanted powers at the end not like a bad thing. Distinctly.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool.
That's awesome. I like that a lot. You're like a scholar of Prydain.
I love these books. I love these books. And we've been sitting here talking about them for an eternity. We're in the summer country. It's been an eternity.
And Glue's here. Get out of here, Glue.
Get out of here.
Stop complaining. Hey, if you liked our epic Prydain marathon, you can find us on Instagram at nostalgicalpodcast, and you can email us at nostalgicalpodcast@gmail.com. And did I get the Instagram handle wrong?
Nope, that was correct.
Excellent. Glad I know us.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a rating or a review. It really helps us out, helps spread the nostalgia around the world. No, I'm kidding. No, but we like reading your comments, so it's very nice.
We do, seriously.
Until next time, hello, hello, by my body and beard, a flam never falters. But back when I was a giant,
my poor tender head,
it's like trying to eat beans with your mouth closed. I'm Taran, and I would like to know what's going on. Did I get all of them?
I think so.
All the big ones.
All the big ones.